What's up, everyone? With the conclusion of the Fear Street trilogy, I figured it's a great time to rank all three movies from worst to best. Real quick, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Let me know your ranking of the three movies, and overall, did you enjoy this trilogy that Netflix kind of put out for us? Anyways, let's get right into the ranking. So this trilogy from Netflix kind of came out of nowhere, this kind of like horror three-part trilogy that we got in 3 weeks. And overall, I really loved what Netflix did here. I think all three movies were good. Even my number 3, I liked all 3 movies. I would give all 3 movies a positive score. And I love what Netflix did here. I love the horror genre. I love how this franchise was a throwback to a lot of other horror franchises. It was just really a very enjoyable experience to watch all 3 of these movies and even review all 3 of these movies. I love what Netflix did with this. Anyways, let's get right into the ranking. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Fear Street Part 1, 1994. I know a lot of people love this one. I completely understand. It's like a 90s throwback with lots of 90s vibes. And there's just a lot of good horror in this movie. Like the opening mall scene where that girl just gets killed in the mall was absolutely brilliant. Even like some of the kills toward the end of the movie are really, really good. The horror just works really well in this movie. It's very bright. It's very vibrant. It feels very 90s. The soundtrack in this movie is also very good. I think this movie was really well made. It feels like a very competent horror movie. The characters in this movie were pretty solid. I enjoyed them quite a bit. I didn't think the acting was too bad at all. I thought it was just perfectly fine. I saw some people complaining about that. I thought the acting was perfectly fine. I'll still stand by the fact that I think this movie doesn't really know what it wants to be. It kind of inspired by too many things. It kind of feels like Scream. It kind of feels like a more traditional slasher movie. It kind of feels like Stranger Things. And it also just feels like Goosebumps from R.L. Stine. So I just think it's a little too many influences you can feel in this movie. I think it needs to be a little more focused, and it needs to know exactly what it wants to be. That's at least how I view it. And I think the character drama in this movie just weighs down the movie a lot. There's a lot of just like kind of characters going back and forth with annoying teen drama that is really hard to get behind, especially in like the first 30 minutes of the film. So that kind of weighed it down a little for me, but nonetheless, I do enjoy this movie quite a bit, and it comes in here at number 3. So coming at number 2 for me is going to be Fear Street Part 2, 1978. This movie is a much more traditional slasher movie compared to the first one, as we go back to a summer camp and we just have a guy with an axe hunting people down throughout pretty much the entire movie. I love that concept. I love the throwback here. I love slasher movies, definitely the best genre in horror, and I loved how this movie just really paid homage to that, like the Friday the 13th movies, though this is like a Friday the 13th movie with actual plot. Most of those don't actually have like a main story going on with like character development. And speaking of characters, I thought the characters in this movie were really, really good. Not quite as good as the characters in the part 1, but I really liked them. They did their job for me in a horror film. The setting in this movie is really fun. Summer camp is such a fun concept and a very like almost like nostalgic concept to go to, and it's always fun when horror movies take place in a summer camp. So I love this classic slasher approach that we get in this movie. It feels like it came out in modern days, but I love how it pays respects and like pays homage to the previous horror films, the horror films of the 70s and 80s. That worked very well for me. And I think this movie just tied in very well to the main story, and they did a good job at convincing you that this movie is necessary in the franchise. And naturally, when you have a sequel that goes back in time, you really need to convince me of that. And I think it did a good enough job. It wasn't perfect, but it did a good enough job. And overall, this movie is just an absolute blast from start to finish, as with the first one, but as with pretty much all 3 of these movies. But it's so much fun. You can easily sit back and enjoy this movie. So I don't have many complaints with this movie. It's just not quite as good as my number 1 in my opinion. But anyways, Fear Street Part 2 comes in at number 2. So coming at number 1, and pretty easily my favorite of the trilogy, is going to be Fear Street Part 3, 1666. This movie absolutely blew away my expectations. Going into it, I was pretty concerned that they were going to go back in time to 1666. I was concerned with how they're going to execute that, and I was just concerned with how they're going to kind of connect it to the main plot and kind of wrap this whole story up. They absolutely killed everything with that. First off, this movie just wraps up this trilogy perfectly. It really makes a cohesive trilogy where all 3 movies connect very well. All 3 movies feel essential to the story, and that's a huge credit to this film for just wrapping it all up. The 1666 stuff works very, very well, I think. I love the historical kind of biopic stuff at the beginning. It's a much darker tone compared to the previous two films. This movie is much more grounded in realism and kind of the real human nature of horror, and with the kind of the witch hunt stuff going on, rather than more like superstition and supernatural horror stuff. This movie is much more realistic and definitely much more dark, easily the darkest of the three, and I really enjoyed that. And it's definitely not as fun compared to the previous two films, but it worked really well. I thought it was some of the strongest stuff in this franchise. And the setting, like I said, was just really done well. It looked really good. They had accents, which was fun, and the setting worked for me. I enjoyed that they went back to 1666. I think the characters in this movie are at their absolute best in this trilogy. You have the characters from the original returning for really the second half of this movie, and I think they did a great job. I think their characters improved. You have grown to care about their characters, and it works really well. And the second half of this movie is just lots of fun as we return to the mall, and you just get lots of kind of 90s horror fun. It's much more of a return to the first movie. The first half not as fun as the previous, but the second half is probably my favorite part of the entire franchise, as they just wrapped everything up perfectly. It's very entertaining. It's very easy to watch. The whole plot in this movie is very easy to follow. It looks really good. These movies, like, once again, have a budget and they feel very well made. They feel like some good creative minds are behind these movies and making them good, and that really helps the watchability of these films. And for me, 1666 just took everything in this franchise and did it the best. I think by far this was my favorite in the franchise. Not to crap on the other two, but I just think this movie did everything the best. So I absolutely love Part 3. Definitely one of my favorite horror movies of the year, and I thought it was a great send off to the trilogy of what was already becoming a good trilogy, and it really created a really solid horror trilogy. Probably the most cohesive horror trilogy I can think of. Not the best, but the most cohesive, where they all connect and they all kind of create a solid functioning story. Anyways, that's gonna do it for my ranking of all three Fear Street movies. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and be sure to share your list down below. I'm definitely excited to see how different people rank them. I wouldn't be surprised to see any of the rankings, any of these movies coming at number 1 or any of these movies coming at number 3. I completely get why some people might not like certain movies in this franchise. I completely get why people do like certain movies in this franchise. It's just a super interesting franchise. Or I don't know if it's a franchise or a trilogy. And I love what they did with it, and I'm really excited to see where this will go next if they decide to bring it back. Anyways, as always, thank you so much for watching if you stuck around to the end of the video, and have a great day.